I withdrew $4 million to buy my dream house and kept it in my mom's safe for a few days. But the next morning, I woke up to find that my mom and sister had disappeared with the money. They sent me a message: "Thank you for your money. Now we can live the life of our dreams." I know Monet's hand down to the last fold of skin. I know the way he held his hand. I feel the curve of his wrist as my own wrist follows his movements. Sometimes I feel like I'm becoming him in these moments. It's just an illusion, though. I'm just Ren Lawley, the maker of spears. It was a surprisingly sunny May morning in Oneonta. The attic studio of our Victorian house was filled with light, and the still-drying paint on my latest work, an exact replica of Haystacks at Giverny, had taken on new hues. I stepped back a few steps, critically examining the canvas. It was almost done. A couple more strokes, and no one, except experts with special equipment, will not distinguish my work from the original. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted my concentration. The door to the studio opened without a knock, unless, of course, my mother never bothered with such trivialities. "Ren, finished yet?" Vivian Lawley entered the room, scrutinizing the canvas with a cold, appraising gaze. Elias called. "He says the client is willing to pay 20% more if he gets the work by Thursday. I'll be done by tomorrow night." I put the brush down, wiping my hands on a rag. "But we agreed on Friday." Vivian looked at the canvas with a scrutinizing eye. At 56, she was still a well-groomed and elegant woman, with impeccable posture and an expression as if carved from marble, beautiful and devoid of warmth. "You realize that's an extra 50,000, don't you?" Her tone hardened. "Don't experiment, Ren. Your value is precisely in making perfect copies. Not everyone has real talent, and you're lucky to have it." I pressed my lips together. Here it was, another reminder that I was nothing more than a tool in her hands. My mother had never made any secret of the fact that she thought my ability to copy was my only asset. "I won't fail," I replied quietly. "Good." Vivian smiled slightly with the corner of her lips. "After your father died, those reproductions of yours became our main income." Reproductions became our main income. "I want you to understand how important that is." I was silent again. Howard Lawley had died 8 years ago, leaving the family a decent inheritance, which Vivian had methodically lived off, maintaining a lifestyle that didn't match our actual means. When the money started to run out, she suddenly discovered that my skill at copying paintings could be quite lucrative. "By the way, Piper didn't sleep home again," I said, changing the subject. "So what?" my mother replied coldly. "Unlike you, she has a social life. She's making useful acquaintances, not hiding in the workshop." It was predictable, Mother's words. My younger sister, who was 26, was allowed everything. Loud parties, casual hookups, drunken antics. My mother kept me under strict control, as if I were a teenager, not a woman in her 30s. "I'm throwing a dinner for the charity committee tonight," Vivian said. "Elias will be with that Japanese collector. Try to make a good impression. It's important for business." The door closed before I could reply that I had other plans. It didn't matter, though, because I was about to change my life and get my long-awaited freedom. I went back to work, but my thoughts were far away from Monet. For the past 3 years, I had been methodically saving money from the sale of my replicas. My mentor, Elias Corwin, the owner of a small gallery in the city center, had extensive connections among collectors who valued quality authorized copies of famous works. A legitimate business with detailed certificates and documents to prove the status of the works as official replicas. I became one of the best in the business. 3 weeks ago, what I was going for all this time happened. A Japanese collector bought 5 of my works at once for a sum that, together with my savings, allowed me to finally realize my dream. $4 million. My ticket to the future. The house on River Street, an early 20th century brick building with a spacious attic and its own garden, was waiting for a new owner. In 2 days, I would sign the papers and become the owner of my own place, where I could set up a real studio. A place where there would be no control, no manipulation, and no eternal hints that I was nothing. That evening, instead of attending the charity dinner, I met Elias at his gallery. The gray-haired man with the shrewd eyes listened intently to my plans, shaking his head. "Are you sure it's worth keeping that much money at home?" he asked, when I told him I had taken the money out of the bank and was keeping it in my mother's safe until the day of the transaction. "It's only for a couple days," I shrugged. "Besides, Mom doesn't know the exact amount. I told her I got less than I actually did." Elias tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. "Ren, let me give you some advice. I know how much this house and independence means to you, but after you move in, don't be afraid to try new things. Your talent as a copyist is unique, but I've always believed there's more to you than that." "What do you mean?" "Maybe it's time to create something of my own." His eyes glittered warmly. "Something that wouldn't be a copy, but an original." I smiled awkwardly. "Original works?" In all my years, I haven't painted a single painting that wasn't a reproduction of someone else's creation. I'm comfortable within the confines of what I've already created, following established rules and lines. Besides, my mother has always said that originality is not my thing. Mom believes that copies are the most profitable for us. It's a way for our family to stay afloat, I said quietly. "What do you think?" Elias asked softly. I didn't answer. The truth was that I didn't know. Years of living under Vivian's tutelage had erased any notion of my own desires and capabilities. I got home late, after the guests had left. I found Piper in the living room, half lounging on the couch with a glass of wine, looking at something on her phone. "You finally showed up." She gave me a mocking look. "Mom's pissed that you missed an important meeting with that Japanese guy. She says you've let the whole family down." I took off my coat, looking at my sister. Despite her resemblance, the same brown hair and light brown eyes as mine, Piper always exuded a cold superiority. "I had a meeting with Elias," I answered, taking a seat across from him. "Where's Mom?" "Talking to some collector about how to get more money out of your pictures," Piper snorted, taking a sip of wine. "You know what the funny thing is? She tells everyone that she's the one who inspires and guides you, that you wouldn't have gotten anywhere without her guidance. It hurt, but it wasn't surprising. My mom always thought she was the best, in charge, and therefore wanted to prove her contribution to everyone." "If you were trying to hurt me, you failed," I lied. Piper stared at me with a cold grin. "Liar. You still care what she thinks, or you'd have moved out a long time ago. But you can't, can you? Because you know that without her, no one wants your copies." "Actually," I couldn't help but smile, "that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm signing the deed to my own house on Friday." Piper stared at me in amazement, even standing up on the couch. "Really? You? A house?" There was a tone of disbelief in her voice. "Where'd you get the money?" "I work, you know," I replied with a touch of irritation, "and I make a good living off my copies." "Does Mom know?" "Not yet. I'll tell you after the paperwork's done." Piper sipped her wine, her eyes thoughtful. "I wonder what Mom will say when she finds out her cash cow is going to run away," she said, with such cold calculation that a chill ran down my spine. The next day passed in the usual clutter. I finished Monet's line, discussed with Elias the details of handing over the job to the client, and met with the realtor in the evening to go over the last formalities before the deal. When I returned home, I found Vivian and Piper at dinner. They were whispering animatedly about something, but when I arrived, the conversation stopped. "Decided to honor us with your presence after all?" Mother said coldly. "You let me down yesterday, Ren." Mr. Tanaka was very disappointed. "I'm sorry." I sat down at the table. "I had an important meeting." "More important than family obligations?" Vivian elegantly blotted her lips with a napkin. "More important than the people who provide you with orders? Don't forget, I'm the one who helps you get to the people we need." That was a lie. Elias was the one who found the customers, but Mother always took all the credit. Elias says I could try writing original work. For some reason, this was something I wanted to discuss with my mother. Vivian and Piper looked at me, and then laughed, as if I'd said something incredibly stupid. "Original?" Vivian shook her head with a dismissive grin. "Honey, be realistic. Your talent is that you know how to copy perfectly. Creating is something else entirely. It takes a real gift, which you don't have. Remember when you were a kid and you tried to draw something of your own?" Piper said with a wry smile. "It was awful. Even your art teacher said art wasn't your thing at all." Dinner passed in the usual barbs and criticism. Afterward, I went up to my room, pulled my take-home papers out of my bag, and reviewed them once more. Everything was in order. I just had to wait until Friday. I went down to the safe hidden behind a painting in my mother's study, one of those flashy trappings of wealth that Vivian was so fond of. Inside was my bag of cash, $4 million, neatly stacked. The seller of the house was old school and preferred cash, and I didn't mind. Less paperwork. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I could hear Vivian and Piper's voices downstairs, arguing about something, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't pay much attention to it, absorbed in thoughts of the future house, the studio, and Elias's words about original work. The morning began with silence. An unusual, ringing silence in a house where I could usually hear Vivian's footsteps, conversations on the phone, music coming from Piper's room. I looked out into the hallway. No one. I went down to the kitchen, empty, and no one was making coffee. A strange premonition swept over me. I walked quickly to my mother's office and pushed open the door. The first thing that caught my eye was that the painting behind which the safe was hidden was hanging crookedly. I rushed to it, pulled it away, saw the open safe. Empty. My heart skipped a beat. I frantically groped the inside of the safe, as if the money might be hiding in some secret corner. Nothing. Absolutely nothing, except... At the bottom of the safe was my bag, still filled with money from yesterday. I grabbed it with shaky hands, unzipped it. Inside, I found a wad of small bills, a couple $1,000s, and a strange little orchid flower, obviously cut from a plant my mother had grown in her greenhouse. Attached to the bag was a note. Vivian's neat handwriting, so familiar and so foreign at the same time. Thank you for your money. Now you can live your dream life. There's enough for paint. I slowly sank to the floor, clutching that mockery in my hands, the money for the paints and the flower. Disbelief, shock, denial. All these feelings succeeded each other until finally they gave way to a clear, cold understanding. My mother and sister had stolen my money. $4 million. Everything I'd earned through years of hard work, money that was supposed to be the beginning of my free life. I spent the rest of the day in a kind of daze, rereading the note over and over, as if hoping the words would change their meaning. A few $1,000s in a flower was all that was left of my $4 million, of my dream of freedom. Calls to Vivian and Piper's phones went unanswered. Their social media accounts suddenly disappeared, as if my relatives had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the bitter taste of betrayal. I was sitting in the kitchen, mindlessly twirling a cup of long cold coffee in my hands, when the doorbell rang. A man in a smart suit stood on the doorstep with a leather folder in his hands. "Miss Lawley? Wren Lawley?" He smiled politely. "My name is Gregory Parks, and I represent the new owners of this house." "What new owners?" My voice sounded hoarse, as if I hadn't spoken in days. Parks raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Hadn't Mrs. Lawley informed you? The house was sold 3 days ago. The new owners move in on Monday, and I have to give you an official eviction notice." He handed me the papers, which I took with numb fingers. 3 days ago. So Vivian had sold the house before she'd even taken my money. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. She'd planned the whole thing in advance. "There must be some mistake," I muttered. "It's my father's house. My mom couldn't have sold it without..." "As far as I know, after Mr. Lawley's death, the house passed into the ownership of his widow." Parks interrupted me. "The transaction is perfectly legal. You have 3 days to vacate the premises." When he left, I sank slowly onto the porch steps. The ground felt like it was slipping away from under my feet. In one day, I had lost not only my money and my family, but also the roof over my head. The house I had lived in all my life was no longer mine. Elias listened to my rambling story without interrupting. His gallery, the Second Life of Art, was in an old building in the center of Oneonta. A small space with high ceilings and beautiful natural light falling from the display windows. The place where I'd spent most of my professional life making copies of masterpieces. "I'm sorry, Wren. It's terrible," he said finally, shaking his graying head. Of course, Vivian always struck me as calculating, but I didn't think she was capable of such a thing. What am I supposed to do now? I clutched the cup of tea he'd made. I have no money, no home. All my belongings, my work materials, it's all there. Elias rubbed his chin, looking at me thoughtfully. First of all, you need to tell the police. He got up and walked to the window. As for a place to live, I have a suggestion. You know the utility room behind the workshop? There's a small room there that I've been using as a storage room. We could quickly adapt it to temporary housing until you decide what to do next. I looked at him gratefully. Elias Corwin wasn't just my mentor, he'd become closer to me than many relatives over the years. Thank you, but I can't accept. You can and you will. I can't offer any more. I'm renovating my house, he said firmly. You're my best artist, Ren. Besides, it's only temporary. While the police deal with your mother and sister. The police. Strangely, the thought only occurred to me now. Of course we should go to the police. It's grand larceny. The Wanianta police station was quiet and cool. The officer on duty, a young man with tired eyes, listened to my story, nodding occasionally and making notes in his notebook. So you voluntarily left the money in your mother's safe, he summarized when I finished. And you have no proof that it was your money? But I explained that it was money for my work. I was beginning to lose my patience. I can provide gallery contracts, bank statements, which would show that you received the money, but not that you put it in that particular safe. The officer shrugged. You see, Miss Lawley, this looks like a family dispute. Your mother may have thought she was entitled to that money, or that it was a gift. Without clear evidence of the theft, there's not much we can do. What about the note? I handed him a piece of paper with mocking lines written in Vivian's hand. The officer took a quick look at it. It's not a confession of theft, he handed it back to me. It doesn't talk directly about the money. Maybe it's about some kind of humorous family exchange. Humorous? My voice trailed off into a scream. $4 million is a joke? Calm down, Miss Lawley. The officer looked at me with cold indifference. I'll register your statement and a detective will contact you. But I must warn you that without direct evidence of the theft, the chances are slim. I left the station feeling betrayed again. Not by my family, but by the system that was supposed to protect me. Returning to a house that was no longer mine was agonizing. I packed the bare essentials: clothes, personal documents, a few sketchbooks and photographs. Professional supplies had to be left behind. Too much stuff to carry. Fortunately, my last work, a copy of Monet, remained in the gallery. At least I would be able to complete it and get a fee. The room in the back of the gallery was tiny, only 5 paces long and 3 wide. The old couch Elias had brought took up most of the space, but it was dry and warm, and no one was going to kick me out. At least not yet. I talked to Detective Hayes, Elias said, helping me settle in. He's an old friend of mine. He promised to look into your case personally, though he warned me that there was little chance of finding them and bringing them to justice. Thank you. I sank tiredly onto the couch. But I still couldn't believe it. How could Mom do this? I always knew she was cold and calculating, but to steal all my money, that's cruel, even for her. The next day, I went to see the only relative left here, my uncle, Macon Thornfield. He lived in the suburbs of Oneonta, in a small 1-story house with a well-kept garden. The man who opened the door looked so much like my father that it took my breath away. The same deep-set eyes, the same chin line, except his hair was completely gray, and there were more wrinkles. Ren? He blinked in surprise. This was someone he hadn't expected to see on his doorstep. Hello, Uncle Macon. I clutched the strap of my bag nervously. I apologize for the sudden visit. I need your help. He led me into the living room, which was simple but tasteful. There were pictures on the walls. My father as a young man, some strangers, and... I froze in front of one picture. A young woman with a radiant smile stood at the easel with a brush in her hand. Who is it? I asked, feeling my heart start to beat faster. Macon stepped closer, his gaze softer. It's Evangeline Moore, your real mother, Ren. The room spun around me. I sank into the nearest chair, unable to take my eyes off the photograph. What? What are you talking about? Macon looked at me guiltily, then sighed heavily and sat down across from me. I thought you knew. I hoped Vivian or Howard had told you the truth. What truth? My voice sounded like a stranger. You're not Vivian's biological daughter, Ren. You're not my own. You were adopted when you were only a few months old." I stared at him, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. Everything I knew about myself, about my family, was suddenly a lie. But why? How? What about Mom? Macon nodded at the photograph. "Evangeline was your mother. She was a talented artist, very promising. She and Howard met at an exhibition, and they had a brief affair. Howard was already married to Vivian, but they were going through a difficult period. Vivian couldn't have children." I listened with bated breath, unable to believe this was my life we were talking about. When Evangeline found out she was pregnant, she decided to keep the baby. Howard was desperate. He didn't want to ruin his marriage to Vivian, but he couldn't give up his child either. They agreed that after giving birth, Evangeline would give the baby girl up for adoption to Howard and Vivian. "What happened to Evangeline?" I asked, struggling to pronounce the unfamiliar name of the woman who turned out to be my real mother. Macon's face darkened. "She died in a car accident when you were about a year old. Coming back from an exhibition in New York, she was in a slip-and-fall accident." I closed my eyes, trying to digest all this information. The woman in the picture who looked so much like me was my mother, the artist, and the woman I'd called Mom my whole life wasn't really my mother, and she stole all my money. "Why didn't anyone tell me before?" I asked, feeling anger rising inside. Macon lowered his eyes. "Howard asked me to stay out of it. He wanted to explain everything to you when the time came. But then he died so suddenly, and Vivian made it clear that my presence in your life was unwelcome and unpleasant." "And Piper?" "She too." "No, Piper is their biological daughter. A real miracle, given Vivian's diagnosis. She was born 4 years after they adopted you. I've been trying to get my head around this new reality. Everything suddenly fell into place. Vivian's coldness, her obvious preference for Piper, her constant reminder that I should be grateful for everything I had." "She never loved me," I whispered. "To her, I was always a reminder of her husband's infidelity." "I'm afraid so," Macon answered quietly. "Howard insisted on the adoption, and Vivian agreed, but I never saw her treat you like her own daughter, especially after Piper was born." "And now she's stolen all my money and sold the house," I grinned bitterly. A perfect ending. Macon raised his eyebrows in surprise, and I told him the whole story, the money I'd saved up, the plans for my own house, the betrayal, and the theft. "I'm sorry, Wren," he said when I was done. "But I'm not surprised. Vivian is very pragmatic and very resentful. Perhaps she took your desire to live apart as a personal insult. Do you have any idea where she might be?" He shook his head. "Vivian has always had a lot of secrets, but I'll help you in any way I can. I should have done this a long time ago for Howard's sake, and for your real mother's sake." I looked at the picture of Evangeline Moore again, the woman who gave me life and, it seems, a talent for drawing, the woman whose existence had been hidden from me for 32 years. "Tell me about her," I asked. "Everything you know." I returned from Uncle Macon's at the gallery after dark, clutching a small box of photographs and newspaper clippings about Evangeline Moore. My real mother. The words still felt strange, foreign, like I was trying on a dress I'd never worn. 32 years of my life was suddenly built on a lie. I wasn't Vivian's daughter. I was the daughter of a talented artist whose name wasn't even mentioned in our house. Sitting on the narrow couch in my tiny room at the gallery, I pored over black and white snapshots. Evangeline was beautiful, with lively eyes and a soft smile so unlike Vivian's cold restraint. In most of the pictures, she was standing at an easel or holding a brush, and there was an elusive freedom in all of them. "You look so much like her," Macon said as we looked at the pictures in his house. "Same eyes, same hands, and the same gift." "Gift?" I asked again. "For painting. Only Evangeline didn't copy, she created. Her work was vivid, distinctive. She found beauty where others saw the ordinary." I put the photos aside and walked over to the small window. The nighttime Oneonta glimmered with sparse lights. A strange feeling of emptiness and yet overflowing with feeling kept me awake. Who am I now? Whose daughter am I? And who could I become? All my life I've been making copies. Perfect, exact reproductions of other people's masterpieces. and all my life I've tried to be a good daughter to a woman who never really accepted me. I was a copy in every sense, repeating other people's work, repeating other people's expectations, trying to fit into a framework that didn't fit me. I pulled a small sketchbook out of my bag, the only art supplies I'd brought from home. My gaze fell on a blank sheet, a blank canvas, like my life right now, wiped clean, ready for something new. I don't know what made me pick up the pencil. Maybe fatigue from the experiences of the last few days. Maybe the strange sense of release that came with the pain of discovery. Maybe Evangeline's shadow that seemed to stand behind my shoulder. But I began to paint, not a copy, not a repeat of someone else's vision, something of my own. Line after line, stroke after stroke. A face emerging from the void, my face, but as if seen by someone else. Eyes that look broken and defiant, lips pressed into a thin line, hair spreading like flames. I painted until dawn, without stopping. When the first rays of sunlight came through the small window, I had a completed sketch of a self-portrait in front of me, as I had never seen myself. The woman in the drawing was strong and broken at the same time, furious and confused, lost and ready to start over. "Wren? You weren't asleep?" Elias peeked into the room as the clock struck 7 in the morning. "I brought coffee and—" He stopped talking when he saw the drawing on my lap. He set the cups on the small table and silently picked up the sketchbook. He studied the image for several long minutes, and I held my breath, suddenly afraid of his reaction. "It's amazing," he finally said quietly. "It's you, but not as I knew you. There's so much pain and strength here at the same time." "I don't know what came over me," I said honestly. "I just started drawing, and I created something real." Elias handed me back the sketchbook, his eyes a new expression, a mixture of pride and surprise. "I always knew you had that fire in you, Wren. Even in your copies, there was more than just technical skill. That day, for the first time in a long time, I felt something akin to hope, to confidence. I asked Elias for canvas, paints, and brushes. Not only did he give me everything I needed, but he also gave me a corner in the gallery's main studio to work in. "You need space," he said. "A real space to create, not this cubbyhole." I spent the next 2 weeks transferring my sketch onto canvas, but not just copying it, developing it, adding to it, putting into each stroke what I couldn't put into words. All my emotions, anger at Vivian and Piper for betraying me, the shock of discovering the truth about my origins, the strange sense of liberation from my previous limitations, all flowed into the colors. The self-portrait was somber, darkly colored, with flashes of bright, almost defiant red. I depicted myself standing in front of a mirror, but the reflection was blurred, as if melting, giving way to another image, more daring, more real. On the edges of the painting, I placed elements symbolizing my former life, fragments of copies of famous works that I had created over the years. They seemed to crumble away, revealing the blank canvas underneath. When the work was complete, I stood in front of it for a long time, not knowing how to feel. It was so unlike anything I had done before. Imperfect, raw, personal to the point of being painful. "I'm done," I told Elias tonight. "But I'm not sure it's good." He followed me silently into the studio. When he saw the painting, he froze in place. I watched his reaction with bated breath, suddenly afraid of his assessment. What if it was just a meaningless smear? What if Vivian was right and I'm only capable of copying? "It's more than good, Wren," Elias finally said, and his voice sounded strangely strained. "This is real art. There's a soul here, there's pain, there's a story. Let me exhibit it." "Exhibit it?" I laughed nervously. "Who would be interested?" "Trust me." He put his hand on my shoulder. "I want to put it in the main hall. Not as the work of an aspiring artist, but as a complete work." The idea seemed crazy, but what did I have to lose? My world had already collapsed, home, family, money, even the idea of my own identity, all gone in a matter of days. One more failure, one less. What did it matter? "Okay," I nodded. "Do as you see fit." Elias organized a small vernissage a week later. My painting, which I called simply Reflection, hung in the center of the main hall, surrounded by other works by local artists. I stood in the corner, feeling like an imposter as visitors moved from painting to painting. Surprisingly, my self-portrait had a steady stream of visitors. People looked at it for long periods of time, discussed it, came back. I'd hear bits of conversation. What a powerful expression, incredible symbolism. One can feel the influence of the expressionists, but with a modern interpretation. "Who is the artist?" asked Elias, a tall man in an expensive suit, pointing to my work. "Ren Lawley," Elias replied. "A new name, but I'm sure you'll hear more about her." By the end of the evening, I was exhausted emotionally, but strangely uplifted. No one made fun of my work. No one said it was a meaningless smear. On the contrary, people saw something in it that touched their feelings. When the last visitors had left, Elias came up to me with a glass of champagne. "Here's to your debut," he smiled, "and to the sale of your first original work." I choked on my champagne. "What?" The man in the suit was Lawrence Baxter. He's a contemporary art collector from New York. He offered $80,000 for your reflection. I stared at Elias incredulously. "You're kidding. That's impossible." "It's true." He handed me the check. "Minus the gallery commission. He wants to pick up the painting in a week, when the exhibition is over." I stared at the amount, not believing my eyes. $80,000 for my first real work. That was 10 times what I'd gotten for my best copies. But why? What was so special about it? "Authenticity," Elias answered simply. "In a world full of copies and repetitions, real emotion is priceless. And in your work, there's plenty of it." I couldn't sleep that night. My thoughts were a whirlwind. I remembered what Vivian had said about my ability to copy. I remembered Piper laughing at my childish attempts to draw my own. And I thought of Evangeline Moore, the woman who had given me life and perhaps her talent. The next morning, I started a new job. Something inside me seemed to burst like a dam. Images I never thought I could create were begging to be put on canvas. I painted almost in a trance, letting my brush move intuitively, not thinking about technique or rules. Within a month, I had created 3 new paintings. They were linked by one theme: transformation, the transition from one state to another. The first one depicted a woman emerging from the shadows, the second a bird breaking a cage, and the third a tree growing through the asphalt. Elias called the series Metamorphosis and suggested that I have a solo exhibition. "It's too soon," I hesitated. "I only have 4 works." "4 amazing works," he countered. "Besides, you can create a few more for the opening. You have 3 months." While working on the new paintings, I continued to research Evangeline's life. Macon gave me contacts of several people who knew her, former classmates, fellow artists, gallery owners she had worked with. I met with them, listening to stories about a young, talented artist who could have accomplished much had it not been for an early death. Little by little, I was assembling a portrait of a woman I never knew, but with whom, as it turned out, I had so much in common. Not just her physical appearance. I had seen her in photographs, and indeed she was strikingly similar, but her inner world, the way she approached art, the way she perceived life. I managed to find some reproductions of her works in old exhibition catalogs. They were bright, vibrant, bold, not at all like the copies I had been making for years, but strangely echoing my new paintings. It was as if some part of her soul lived in me, waiting for the moment to manifest itself. The most surprising discovery was a small painting that Gerald Forrester had saved. He had brought it, wrapped in a soft cloth, to our meeting at the cafe. "I bought it at that very exhibition," he said, carefully unwrapping the package. "I've never regretted it." The painting was called Waiting. It showed a young woman standing at a window. Her face was not visible, just a silhouette against the bright light pouring in from outside. But in that figure, in her pose, there was so much longing and hope at the same time that it took my breath away. "She wrote it when she was pregnant," Gerald said quietly. "Shortly before you were born." I couldn't take my eyes off the painting. The woman in it, my mother, was waiting for me, looking into a future she never saw. "I want you to have it," Gerald said suddenly. Evangeline would have wanted that. "But I can't accept. It's a valuable work and, for me, it's just a painting I've loved for years." He smiled softly. "For you, it's part of your history, your legacy." I took waiting into my little room at the gallery and hung it across from my bed. Every morning I woke up looking at my mother's work and felt a strange calmness. It was as if she was watching me, guiding me without even being there. As I worked on these paintings, I could feel something new growing inside me, a confidence I never had before. I was no longer a copy. I wasn't a shadow of Vivian or a reflection of someone else's expectations. I was Wren Lawley, Evangeline Moore's daughter, an artist who had found her own voice. And in this discovery, in this new understanding of myself, I found a strange comfort. My life was not wasted. I was honing my skills, learning to see detail, to understand structure and composition. All those years of copying the great masters had been a necessary step so that now I could create something truly my own. The year flew by like a blink of an eye. My first solo exhibition at Elias Gallery was an unexpected success. Critics from regional publications praised the fresh look and emotional depth of my work. Each painting found a buyer, and at prices I could not have dreamed of before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just making a living. I was creating something that had real value for other people. "You found your voice," Elias told me after the show. "What's happening now is just the beginning." He was right. Gradually, art magazines began to write about me. Not only private collectors, but also small contemporary art museums began to acquire my work. I moved from a tiny cubbyhole at the gallery to a spacious apartment on the second floor of an old building in the center of Oneonta, where I set up a real studio with large windows and perfect northern light. The money, of course, didn't get me back the $4 million that Vivian and Piper had stolen. The police had never been able to find them. It was as if they'd vanished into thin air along with my savings. But that loss didn't seem so devastating now. I realized that I had found something much more valuable, my real self, my own way in art. My style continued to evolve. From the dark, emotionally intense images of my first works, I gradually moved on to more complex compositions in which light played an increasing role. Critics wrote about the unusual combination of expressionism and symbolism in my paintings, about the ability to convey inner light even in the darkest images. I didn't quite understand these formulations. I just painted what I felt, letting my brush move almost intuitively. That's how, following my intuition, I found myself one rainy October day in a small bookstore called The Turned Page on the outskirts of town. I was looking for books on 19th century art history in an attempt to better understand the origins of modern trends in painting. The store turned out to be cozy, smelling of old paper and coffee. Tall wooden shelves that went up to the ceiling, narrow aisles between them, and an ancient staircase on wheels to access the upper shelves. All this created the atmosphere of some other world, where time flowed differently. "What can I do for you?" A voice behind me made me flinch. I turned around and saw a tall man of about 35, with disheveled dark hair and attentive gray eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. "I'm looking for books on the history of Impressionism and Post-Impressionism," I replied. "You're in luck," he smiled. "I have a whole section devoted to this subject. It's true that many of the editions are rare and not for sale, but you can work with them here." He led me to the far corner of the store, where there was a small table by the window and several comfortable chairs. "I'm Declan Mercer, owner of this temple of book dust," he introduced himself, extending his hand. I spent a few hours at the Turned Page that afternoon. Declan proved to be an incredibly erudite conversationalist. Not only did he have an excellent understanding of art, but he also wrote stories, essays, sometimes poetry. We talked about the influence of the Impressionists on modern painting, the differences between the American and European schools, and how literature and the visual arts intertwine and influence each other. "You're very interested in art history," Declan remarked when I shared my observations about Monet's technique. "Does that have something to do with your work?" I thought for a moment. I'd never told anyone but Elias about my past before, about the years I'd spent making copies, about Vivian and her deception, about discovering my true origins. "It's a long story," I finally said. "I have plenty of time," he replied simply, "and I know how to listen." So I told it. About everything. About life with Vivian, about my copyist's talent, about betrayal and theft, about meeting Uncle Macon, and discovering the truth about my real mother, Evangeline Moore. I've been trying to find her work, to learn more about her, I finished. But so little information has survived. She died young, and her career was just beginning. Declan listened intently, not interrupting. When I finished, he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I can help with the search, he said. I have access to archives and databases that aren't available to ordinary users, plus old connections in the publishing world. Really? I felt a surge of hope. That would be wonderful. Come back tomorrow, he suggested. I'll prepare some materials. And so began our collaboration, which gradually grew into something more. Declan turned out to be not only erudite, but also incredibly helpful. He immersed himself in the search for information about Evangeline with such enthusiasm as if it were his own business. Thanks to his connections, we found old catalogs of exhibitions my mother had participated in, several interviews with her in small circulation publications, even her student work preserved in the archives of the art school where she studied. Each new discovery brought me closer to the woman who gave me life, but whom I never knew. Our relationship developed naturally, without haste. Declan became not only my partner in exploring Evangeline's past, but also someone with whom I could share my innermost thoughts, my fears, and my hopes. He understood my need to create, to express myself through art. And I appreciated his quiet confidence, his depth, and his ability to see beauty in simple things. In the spring, when Oneonta was drenched in blooming gardens, I received an invitation to teach a workshop at the local art college. At first I refused. What kind of teacher am I? But Declan insisted. You have a lot to share, he said. Your path is unique, and you can help others find their voice, just as you have found it yourself. The workshop was a revelation. The young artists, most of whom were only a little younger than me, listened to my story with such attention and asked such profound questions that I suddenly realized that my experience could really be valuable to others. You can learn a technique, I told them. But finding yourself, your own way of looking at the world, is what is really important. Sometimes you have to lose everything you think you have. After the class, several students came up to me, showing me their work, asking for advice. I could see in their eyes what I felt myself, a passionate desire to create something real, and a lack of confidence in my own abilities. You were great, Declan said as we drove home. Those guys literally absorbed every word you said. I loved it, I admitted. Sharing my experiences, helping them see their potential, it's fulfilling. That night, over dinner at a small restaurant where we were already known as regulars, an idea was born. What if we opened a studio? Declan suggested it. Not just a studio for your work, but a place where young artists could learn, experiment, find their way? A studio? I wondered. But that would require space, equipment. I have a second floor above the store, he smiled. Right now it's a warehouse and my den. But it's a big space, with great lighting. It could be remodeled. I'm fascinated by the idea. To create a place where art would be not just a commercial product, but a living process, where people could share experience, inspire each other. It wouldn't just be a studio. I felt the enthusiasm building inside me. We could hold exhibitions of emerging artists, meetings with writers, poetry evenings, a real creative center. Exactly. Declan squeezed my hand. I'll take care of the organizational part. You take care of the creative part. What do you think? I think it's the best idea I've had in over a year. I leaned across the table and kissed him. We spent the next 2 months working hard. Declan turned out to be a talented organizer. He found builders to remodel the space, arranged for supplies at wholesale prices, even got a small grant from the local Arts Foundation. I was in charge of the creative concept, coming up with masterclass programs and lists of necessary equipment. The opening of the studio was an event for Oneonta. Not only local artists and students came, but also critics from New York, collectors I had worked with, even representatives of contemporary art museums. Elias gave a warm speech in which he remarked, not without pride, that he had always believed in my potential. That evening, as the last guests left, Declan and I sat on the floor amidst the scattered glasses and empty plates, too tired to clean up, but too excited to sleep. We did it, I whispered, looking at the space that had been transformed from a warehouse into a bright, airy studio with easels, work tables, and an exhibition area against the far wall. "This is just the beginning." Declan put his arm around me. "There's so much more to come." He was right. Over the next few months, the original became the cultural center of Oneonta. We held workshops for artists of all levels, from beginners to professionals. We organized exhibitions where the work of art college students hung alongside the work of recognized masters. We organized meetings with writers, musicians, designers, anyone who could inspire and expand artistic vision. We created a special program for children from disadvantaged families, free drawing lessons where they could not only learn basic skills, but also express their emotions and find an outlet from the complexities of life. My own career also continued to develop. A major gallery in New York offered to hold a solo exhibition of my work. Art Focus magazine published a big article about me, calling me one of the most interesting new voices in contemporary art. But the most important thing for me was not critical acclaim or commercial success, but the realization that I had finally found my place in the world. A place where I could be myself, create what really matters, and help others to do the same. The exhibition at the Morrison Gallery in New York was a turning point in my career. Critics wrote about the bold palette and emotional sincerity of my work. Collectors lined up to buy the paintings, and my name began to be mentioned in serious contemporary art reviews. I didn't think much of Vivian and Piper. The police never found them, and gradually that wound, if not healed, stopped bleeding. I built a new life where bitterness and resentment had no place. That all changed one spring day when I was checking the mail in my office. Among the letters, I found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a few lines written in familiar handwriting. "Ren, I need to talk to you. It's important. It's not what you think it is. Please give me a chance to explain. Piper." The envelope also contained a business card for a cheap motel on the outskirts of Oneonta and a phone number. Was something wrong? Declan peeked into the office and, seeing my expression, frowned worriedly. I silently held out the note to him. He read it carefully. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Part of me wants to just throw it away and forget about it. The other part wants to find out the truth," he finished for me. "That's understandable. But Ren, be careful. These people have already fooled you once." That evening, I called Detective Hayes. 2 years ago, he was the only one on the force who took my case seriously, even though he couldn't help. "They showed up," I said, without preamble when he answered the phone. "What? When?" I could hear the professional excitement in his voice. I told him about the note and the business card. "Don't make any moves without me," Hayes said firmly. "I'll be there in half an hour." He showed up even earlier, a tall, slouching man with tired eyes and a keen gaze. We discussed our options at length and finally came to a decision. I would contact Piper and agree to a meeting, not in a motel, but in our studio on my property. Hayes would be present discreetly to hear what Piper had to say. The next day, I called the number on the note. "Hello?" Piper's voice sounded hoarse, tired. "It's Ren," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I got your note." "Ren!" I could hear the relief in her voice. "Thanks for calling. I need to talk to you, explain everything." "Okay," I took a deep breath. "Come to the original studio on Maple Street, tomorrow night at 5. "Studio?" She sounded confused. "Maybe we should pick another—" "Yes, the studio." I made it clear that the meeting would be on my rules. "Tomorrow at 5. Come alone." At exactly 5, the doorbell rang. Hayes hid in my office, leaving the door ajar to hear the conversation. I opened the door and barely recognized the woman on the threshold. Piper had always been spectacular, well-groomed. Now a haggard figure stood before me with droopy eyes and carelessly gathered hair. The cheap clothes, the lack of jewelry, it all seemed uncharacteristic of my sister. "Hello, Ren," she tried to smile, but it came out pathetic. "Thanks for agreeing to meet me." I silently led her inside. Piper looked around, clearly impressed with the studio space. "You're doing well, aren't you?" I could hear the jealousy in her voice, despite her feigned concern. "Yes." I pointed to the chairs in the corner. "Let's sit down." We sat across from each other. Piper fidgeted with the strap of her tattered bag. "I don't know where to start." she said finally. It's so complicated. Start with the truth. My voice sounded colder than I intended. Why did you steal my money? Why did you disappear? And why are you back now? Piper took a deep breath. We didn't mean to steal from you, Ren. We really didn't. It all came out wrong. Mom kept it from everyone, but we were up to our eyeballs in debt. After Dad died, she tried to maintain the same standard of living, taking out loans, borrowing from some shady people. And these people started making threats. But when Mom found out about your money, she saw it as the only way out, Piper continued. At first, she planned to just borrow some of it, pay off the worst creditors, and then pay you back with interest. But they found us, and we had to run. In a hurry, in the middle of the night. With my $4 million, I remarked. Yes, she lowered her eyes. It was awful. I know it was. But we were in a panic. And then we had to give most of the money to those people. We had almost nothing left. What do you want me to do? I asked you bluntly. Forgiveness. Piper looked up at me, tears glistening in her eyes. Mom wants to talk to you. To explain. She's sorry, Ren. We both are. I stayed silent, trying to figure out what was behind it. Sudden remorse after 2 years of running away? Coming back now that I'd succeeded? Please, Piper stepped forward. Give us a chance to explain. Mom's waiting for you. Just you, no strangers. Family talk. Where? I asked, pretending to hesitate. At our house, she wrote the address on a piece of paper. Tomorrow night? 7 o'clock? I took the piece of paper, scrutinized the address. It was a small house in a wooded part of the suburbs, pretty secluded. Okay, I said finally. I'll be there, but I can't promise I'll be able to forgive you. Thank you, Piper exhaled. That's more than we deserve. When she left, Hayes came out of the office, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. What do you think? I asked. It's a composite story, he shook his head. Too much of a story, and full of holes. If they were really being pursued by creditors, they wouldn't be back in Wanianta, and they wouldn't be living in a house registered in their real name. Did you check? While you were talking, I ran the address. He nodded. The house was rented in Vivian Lawley's name a month ago. No sign they're hiding or afraid of anything. A trap, then. I sat up, feeling strangely empty. But why? What do they want? We'll find out tomorrow. Hayes put his hand on my shoulder. But you can't go in there alone. I have an idea. I pulled up to the house Piper had given me at 7 p.m. sharp. It was a small wooden structure surrounded by pine trees. Before I got out of the car, I checked the microphone hidden under the collar of my blouse. Hayes and his partner were watching from an inconspicuous van parked 100 yards away. The door opened before I even knocked. Vivian stood on the doorstep. She'd changed, too skinny and aged, but she still had the same posture and cold gaze. Ren, she nodded. Come in. Inside, the house was unexpectedly comfortable, tastefully furnished, no signs of poverty or fear. Piper was waiting in the living room, much better dressed than when we'd met in the studio. I'm glad you came, Vivian said, pointing to a chair. Do you want something? Tea? Wine? Nothing, thanks. I sat down, keeping my distance. Piper said you wanted to explain yourself. Vivian and Piper looked at each other. Something in their gazes alerted me, too much self-assurance, too little remorse. Yes, to explain. Vivian sat down across from me. But first, I want to congratulate you on your success. We've seen the articles about your exhibitions, about the studio. You're doing great. Thank you. I remained wary. But I didn't come for compliments. Of course, she nodded. You want to know why we took your money. The truth is, Ren, that money was never entirely yours. Yes, you made copies, but who educated you? Who gave you the connections in the art world? Who supported you all these years? We're a family, Vivian continued in a tone that brooked no objection. In a family, everyone shares. You were so preoccupied with your plans, your home, you forgot about us. And we had problems. Serious problems. What kind of problems? I asked. Piper talked about creditors, threats. There were certain financial difficulties, Vivian said evasively, but we got through it. And now we want a fresh start. No hard feelings, no hard feelings. No hard feelings? I couldn't believe my ears. You stole $4 million, left me homeless, disappeared for 2 years, and now you want to start over? Don't be so dramatic, Vivian grinned. You've always been prone to over-emotions. Look how well things turned out. You've become a successful artist, you have your own studio. If we hadn't taken the money, you would have just bought a house and kept making copies. We did you a favor. And what do you want now? I asked, trying to remain calm. We want to officially close this matter. Vivian pulled out some papers. A small document in which you confirm that you have no claims against us. A formality. Why do you want it? We want to go back to Oneonta, Piper interjected. A normal life, without the fear of you suing us. And you expect me to just sign this? After everything you've done? You've always been a sensible girl. Vivian smiled a cold smile. And you must realize that litigation is not in your best interest, especially now that you have a reputation. Imagine the headlines. Successful artist sues her own mother. It's not exactly great publicity, is it? What if I say no? I asked. Then we'll be forced to reveal some, unpleasant details about your past. Vivian leaned closer. About how you've been scamming customers for years, selling them overpriced copies, your questionable business practices. I have a lot of interesting documents in my possession. It's blackmail. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. It's an offer of a peaceful solution, Vivian corrected me. Mother to daughter, even if not the mother's own. At that moment, the living room door swung open, and Detective Hayes and 2 officers entered the room. Vivian Lawley, Piper Lawley, you're under arrest on charges of grand fraud, blackmail, and threats, Hayes announced, showing his badge. We have a warrant for your arrest and a search of your home. Piper shrieked and backed away. Vivian froze in place, her face pale. This is some kind of mistake, she began, but Hayes interrupted. Your entire conversation is recorded, Mrs. Lawley, including threats and attempted blackmail. Vivian rose abruptly and rushed toward the door leading to the other room. One of the officers intercepted her, but she managed to grab a bag against the wall. Let me go, she shouted, trying to break free. You have no right! The bag opened, and wads of bills spilled out onto the floor, dozens of wads of bills tied together with bank tapes. Interesting. Hayes bent down and picked up one of the wads. For people who've given all their money to creditors, you have an impressive savings. Piper burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. It's all her, she shouted, pointing at Vivian. It was her idea. She made me participate. Shut up, you fool, Vivian hissed, trying to free herself from the officer's grip. Not a word without a lawyer. I stood dumbfounded, watching as the last spectacle played out by the women I'd once considered family crumbled. The trial was 3 months later. I attended every session, watching Vivian's confidence give way to fear and Piper's ostensible remorse to anger and accusations against her mother. They received real sentences. Vivian 5 years, Piper 3 years suspended with mandatory community service. The court also ordered me to repay the money I had stolen, although I realized that I was unlikely to ever receive the full amount. On the day the verdict was announced, I returned to the studio late at night. Declan was waiting for me with dinner and a bottle of wine, but before joining him, I went into my studio. There, on 3 large canvases, stood a nearly completed triptych, my new work that I'd been laboring over for the past few months. The first panel depicted the artist copying someone else's work, a figure caged by her own limitations and other people's expectations. The second showed the moment of transformation, the broken cage, the first tentative steps towards freedom, the first original stroke. The third, which I had finished the day before, represented an artist in flight, free, confident, creating her own world with bright, bold colors. I looked at the triptych, realizing that it wasn't just a painting. It was the story of my life. The story of how I stopped being a copy and became an original. How I found my own voice, my authentic self. Thank you for watching this story. Do you think you would be able to forgive such a betrayal if you were in the main character's shoes? Would you give your family a second chance? Or would you start life from scratch? Write your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories.